Hello, everybody, and welcome to Open Network User Group Podcast. I'm Mark Tierney, ONUG CTO. Today, we turn our eye to the world of cybersecurity and digital threats. In this episode, we confront one of the most menacing adversaries in the digital landscape, a threat whose frequency and sophistication continue to rise, wreak havoc on individuals, organizations, and even nations. It's crucial to understand the inner workings of this insidious malware. I said insidious. That's right. So join us as we explore the dark underbelly of the internet. But first, ONUG Fall 2023. It's going to be in New York City. That's right, New York City at the Chelsea Industrial Events Center, October 24th and 25th. Come join the ONUG global community and check it out. We're going to have some incredible tech execs, enterprise architects, infrastructure engineers, cloud providers, thought leaders as we demonstrate, discuss the tenets of enterprise cloud networking, security, policy. The list goes on. Go to onug.net to register for the event today. You can use the promo code ONUG Podcast, and we'll give you a big 20% discount. That's right. Big sweaty wad of cash that you can use for other stuff in your life. All right. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe to this podcast. Tell all your friends, tell all your enemies. We want to see you here every week. All right. Joining me for today's podcast, that's right, it's Michael Thomas Clark. Michael is the co-chair of ONUG's Cloud Native Security Working Group, and he's leading us through a series that we call The Wages of Cybercrime. Hey, Michael, how's it going, buddy?
Hey, Mark, what an introduction. Wow. Okay. I'm going to
I
have some coffee and get
you know what I was doing?
You use some big words there. Like you didn't use conundrum. This is a conundrum.
No. Listen.
It's a big, sweaty,
I didn't wake up knowing
wad of conundrum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I didn't wake up knowing I was
So-
going to say insidious today, but I'm glad for the opportunity.
I have a funny feeling you don't plan a lot of those things, but it's part of your charm. So
It's
yeah,
true.
it's true. You have stumbled into the best half hour, 40 minutes of your life that you could possibly even imagine. Can you imagine that? And as Kurt Vonnegut would say, and so this is The Wages of Cybercrime, a modest little podcast that Mark and I started a few months ago as a monthly effort. We are going to try to get on track as a monthly effort here with episode
Details.
number 2. Yeah, which starts off a new mini series. Actually, what's streaming services these days without a mini series? We should be on Netflix. The current state of our enterprise cyber estate. See what I did there?
I did.
Current cyber estate enterprise-wide. At least, what is dominating the field, at least here at the halfway point in 2023. Everyone's heard of ransomware, and that's where we're going to start. It's up number 1 as the undeniable bad boy of the current state in the dubious first position. 40% of all cyber attacks involve ransomware. And you all know the drill. Somebody has stolen your stuff, and they want that sweaty wad of cash to give it back to you. And maybe they will, and maybe they won't. It's kind of like real kidnapping. But as we morph into that conversation, I just want to point to the weeks ahead. We're going to talk about other things that define the current estate, such as zero-day attacks. That's becoming an even more interesting story, Mark, than you and I.
It's a favorite of mine, Michael.
I know it's a favorite of yours. But as I started digging into it over the last couple of weeks to make sure I had the latest, greatest stuff, I discovered that there's stuff going on that I wasn't aware of, and imagine that. So we've got some hot stuff to talk about, especially as zero-day and ransomware start to intertwine their nasty parcels. That's on the threat front. On the defensive front, we're also going to, as weeks go by, we're going to talk about zero trust being probably your best bet. Not probably, definitely your best bet against zero-day. We've got a whole show lined up on that with the inimitable Ken Aurora of F5, who has written a paper, and maybe he will. That paper will appear in an upcoming book of ours. Beyond that, we will talk about how do you get a handle on all this stuff when you have a talent crunch, real, imagined, or otherwise. It's a big topic. What are the results of all the above? How is this affecting the cyber economy? What are our framework of recommendations? We've got all kinds of good content for you. But first up, so it's pretty much undeniable at this point. Multiple sources from around the country, around the globe, and across the industry tell us the same thing, which is over and over again, cyber attacks year after year continue to grow in quantity and sophistication as the same time as organization systems become increasingly complex. And that's a statement we could have made probably at any point in our mutual and respective and collective careers, Mark, right? I mean, going way back to the
Sure.
well, we won't mention the year, but who are
No.
these multiple sources anyway? They're literally hundreds of them. Go do a Google search. But I'm going to tell you that there are only 4 today that I'm focused on because I got my best stuff from these people, and I consistently do. First up, our good partner, the folks at Splunk, with their State of Security 2023 report. It's hard to beat their research. It's hard to beat their findings. It's just really well done all around. So if you do nothing else, go download the State of Security 2023, and it'll be the best hour you ever spent. They cover 1,500 cybersecurity professionals in 10 countries around the developed world across any sector that anybody ever thought mattered. Not far behind, just a slightly different angle, is the report from Sysdig called Cloud Native Security and Usage Report 2023 edition. I'm a big fan of that. A little bit perhaps off to one side because it's so backup focused, but when you're talking ransomware, you want to have a good backup. So turn to my good friends at Veeam, some of whom I really do know, for their 2023 data protection report. And finally, a report that just wows me year after year, not so much for cybersecurity, but for all things you really want to know about what's going on in the desktop, what we used to call the desktop and server world, but infrastructure, the SRE report 2023 coming out of Catchpoint. And we'll put some links up somewhere like on our website, right? But a consistent message from across the board, beyond just complexity and volume, is most security teams tell the surveys that they're just so stuck in reactive mode to be effectively proactive, which is, if you manage this stuff, not a happy thing. But the number one challenge now for 3 years running, increasing sophistication. 38% of Splunk's respondents say that. 30% say that. In second place is security stack complexity, the tools themselves. Third place, imagine that, the tools are as complex as the challenge to get rid of. So third place, IaaS, infrastructure as a service, and software as a service. Those two platforms in general are driving so much challenge in risk monitoring and management. A really close third place, 29, 28% respectively, think that this is their biggest challenge. Were I taking this survey today, after some of the recent consulting gigs I've done, I would have put this down as my first headache, especially when you're trying to monitor and manage cyber risk across multiple cloud service providers and third parties, and even more so if you're managing a hybrid multi-cloud on-premise environment, which, guess what, is the case with a lot of the really big enterprises. The result, workload demands are constantly trapping teams in react mode. So beyond those small problems, what's really clear is that people are using terms. I mean, the overwhelming majority of survey respondents will select terms like, when given the chance, they're overwhelmed by the number of attacks and false positives. The bad guys aren't slowing down. So the bad guys aren't slowing down by any means. Not only are we getting more attacks, more sophisticated attacks, more complex environments. This was kind of a shocker to me, but not really once I thought about it. Once in your network, we have this thing called dwell times. How much time do folks have, once they've made that north-south, if you will, entry into your network? How much time do people have to sort of peruse your east-west reality? And that is now 2.25 months on average. So sleep 9 weeks. Just think about that. What can bad actors do when you give them the equivalent of a summer vacation inside your network, right? If nothing else, it tells you where the phrase assume breach comes from. As
Mhm.
one of our colleagues from the Cloud Native Security Group likes to say, Ken Aurora, says the hacker's goal is to land and expand, and it appears that they're getting plenty of time to do just that, steal and break things 9 weeks worth. So let's now turn from this kind of set of broad trends to some
Yeah.
more highly specific. Of course, ransomware has been around for a while. If I get up on my pedestal about this, I might say it's really been enabled by cyber currency and I mean, anonymous is anonymous, right? I mean, can you imagine if back in the days of when kidnapping was the one of the FBI's biggest concerns, so you got a message that said put the put it was basically put the money in an envelope and show and drop it on a park bench or something, right? And then
Sure.
everybody waits for you to collect it from the park bench, and maybe you
Right.
actually are stupid enough to show up. Well, now the park bench is in cyberspace, so
Right.
it's an unknown thing most of the time,
Little
unless you.
tough, little tougher to trace, right? Yeah.
It's a little tougher to trace. So if I were king of the world, these cyber Bitcoin, blockchain guys would have some serious sweating to do. Moving on, let's get into those. If I haven't thrown enough numbers at you, I'm going to throw a few more. If we move from the Splunk
By
survey,
the way, ransomware numbers and all cybersecurity numbers are like toilet paper math. The hardest math on the planet is calculating 2-ply rolls, 1-ply. This is growing, this is not growing. Like it's
yeah,
sometimes I find it's hard to assess
yeah,
what's
it is.
happening in.
It's true. And you look at a concrete number that somebody puts on a page, and your first instinct. My first instinct is to say, well, this looks like, this is so and so organization, must be true, right?
Mhm.
would they lie? Would they lie to me? Well, it's not a matter of intentionally lying. It's a matter of this being a really snaky thing to try to get your hands around. And how do you count it? First of all, how many people that get hacked put up their hand and say, hey, I was hacked. You're number one, number two, number three tech company in the whole world. I was hacked, and we lost 8 million, subscribers, credit cards, and personal information. I mean, the fact is, you're supposed to report this stuff to the FBI. The fact that we have any numbers at all is kind of good to see. But Veeam went ahead and did an anonymous, of course, data protection report. They actually, I don't know how Splunk did theirs. They don't fess up. It's 1,250 firms, but they don't tell you how they actually got the info. But this was a blind survey conducted by an unnamed third-party research firm. So if presumably people are going to be about as honest as they might be, or not. But we see that 85% of all enterprises in the world, again, how do you define an enterprise? Something of some size, experienced at least one cyber attack in the preceding year. So, you know, um, it's quite
How could they
likely
not?
if you're running a shop that you're going to, and you've got your advertising IP addresses on the public internet, whether they're behind, no matter what they're sitting behind, you will get them, as we used to experience at a certain financial services firm where we worked, gazillions of people a day banging on your front door.
Mm.
But last year, only 76% fessed up. This year, it's 85%. And when you dip into their qualitative statements, they're saying things like, as I said before, we're overwhelmed. This is a disaster. Now, the interesting thing is, it's not so. It feels like a technology issue, right? But a lot of these folks will check the box that says, the key problem here isn't so much technical as organizational. 60% believe that significant improvement or a complete overhaul is needed between their cyber and their backup teams. So 85% of those people, 43% of them reported having had their data and systems held hostage. So that's interesting. Um,
Right.
not everybody gets held up even when they've been attacked. And of these, supposedly, and I think this is a dubious number, 75% report that they actually paid the ransom. Now, this is a classic, it depends on where you look, what number you're going to find. The FBI says 50%. This Veeam report says 75% pay the ransom. And that could just be a function of whether I'm looking at mid 2022, mid 2023, the beginning of the year. My research shows reports of something on the order of 50% plus paying their ransomers, attempting to paying their ransomers. And of those, 50% claim to be paying $250,000 or more. So the average cost of a ransomware experience, shall we say, is constantly going up. But this is, I'm not going to share my screen because that's a little complicated at the moment. But, if you actually look at the total value, and again, this is Chain Analysis, a well-reputed firm. But back in 2017, in those glorious pre-pandemic days, less than 50 million in 2017 was going out the door to, a mere 50 million mark was going out the door to ransomware. Now, who knows if we had the mechanisms in place for even counting it back then. But by the first year of the pandemic, that had gone up many, many, many times, like 20-fold to almost 800 million. It stayed that way into 2021. And then in 2022, it fell by half. So presumably by this point, people have their methods down, right? So we can maybe compare the last few years and say, there's a real serious drop off here. It's not a function of fewer attacks. The FBI says it's a function of an increasing refusal, get this, on the part of victims to actually pay their hackers.
Well, and so my understanding is there's a big driver there, and the statistic I heard, and this again, that you see so many different statistics. But the statistic I saw was only about 8% of those who paid the ransom got their system back or their data back or whatever it was back. So where's the real value there? I mean, it's hard to even assign value as an appropriate term to this, but.
I know. So we're seeing more. I mean, in 2022, there were at the high water mark was 300 ransomware attacks a month. So it's something like half the money of 2021, but twice the number of attacks. So you can start to draw some inferences from that. We'll see the 2023 June quarterly numbers come out soon. We haven't really got a lot of good data for this year. We had over 400 earlier in the year, but it's too early to see a secular trend. Some numbers around that. The headline there, as you say, Mark, paying ransomware doesn't necessarily guarantee data recovery, not in the least.
Not even close.
In fact, 60% that paid, only 60% that paid were actually able to restore data. Now that's complicated because it doesn't really line up with your 8%.
No.
But I got 21% were not able to restore their data. 16% say they didn't pay because they were able to recover from their backups. And that's really what I want to focus on here. Clearly, this is where you want to be. You want to be in the world of, before the fact prevention. I'm speaking to the choir, I know, and our audience, I'm sure, is part of that choir. But you don't want to be in the business of being, again, terribly obvious, pushed back on your heels and forced to go somewhere that you really don't want to go, which is putting all that money in a bag under the park bench or in the cloud. So this whole trick of not paying comes down to, I'll take a term from some other experts, backup immutability. The whole notion of immutable infrastructure, immutable storage. What does this boil down to? Well, you've got to have backup credentials that are truly secure. The first thing that a ransomware attacker will go for, if they can figure it out, is where your backups. If they've had a, say, perfect scenario for a hacker, they've been in your network for 2.5 months. Not saying everyone has, that's an average, but they've been in your network doing east-west perambulating around, and they figure out where your network data backup data store is, right? Not really hard to do. There's only so many places most admins are going to put it, so you can start looking for file names and start looking for directories with certain names, and go if you're AWS, you're going to go see if they've try to see if your hacking is that good, if they've got the backup actual AWS backup service running, which is a dead giveaway, or if they've got snapshot files sitting somewhere. But anyway, you've got to be able to automate these. You've got to have a backup plan that actually gets the backups cleanly into a place that they'll be safe. So I'm not saying anything surprising here. I wish I had some sort of magic insight, but it's the oldest trick in the book. When we were managing in a much more analog world, even though it was digital, it wasn't an internet world. What would you do with your backups? You would test them if you were worth your salt as an operator, right? You would test your backups. So can you imagine people not ensuring that their backups are actually restorable? So you can't have backup repos being deleted or corrupted. Immutability can be achieved through cloud repositories and also via disk storage. So a hybrid strategy isn't actually bad, especially when you consider that a lot of big enterprises not only have multi-clouds, but they also have some sort of a data center, whether it's hosted, whether multiple data centers, they've got some sort of disaster recovery as a service. Something like 70% of enterprises over 1,000 people have cloud hosted data recovery as a service. And so you've got to be able to make sure that your backups are secure. You've got to make sure that they've been tested and they've gone through that. You've got a testing pipeline set up on a regular basis. You don't want to reinfect the environment upon recovery, and there are lots of examples about that. So you go and you verify by doing some sort of staged restoration. I clearly can't get into the sort of the playbook for how do you make sure you are restoring an environment so it doesn't get re-corrupted. But 44% of the people who have been successful have a staged restoration system where their first restore is to an isolated test area sandbox. Some people restore to prod, scan immediately. 10% restore and hope for the best, and 9% don't do anything, right? So if that seems like a lot of work, well, it is a lot of work. But remember,
my suspicion is one of the most difficult aspects of this. I mean, when you start getting into recovery point objectives and recover time objectives and things like that are critical, whether you're doing immutable recoveries or not, and that is the really what you want, is to understand when your breach occurred. And I think that is potentially the toughest part about this, because I think a lot of enterprises have this down. They understand what their recover point objectives are. I need to restore at this point in time prior to a breach. But how do you know? How do you know that that's when you were infected, right? That's a potential tough one.
Yeah, and it's not surprising, that the enterprises with deep pockets, some of the people many of whom are supporters of ONUG, come to our conferences,
Absolutely,
are part of our
100%.
working group, and so on. We got serious players, and not naming any names, but there's some very big players who you could bet your next bonus and a bunch more after that they've got this stuff figured out, right? Because it's just, regulated industries, whether it's the FDA that can come put the locks on your door, or the SEC, or what have you, you've got to be compliant. You've got to be able to prove that you're compliant. And a lot of that has to do with verifiable, clean restore situations. Not to mention the reputational loss, which can be catastrophic. Although I've always been amazed when I look at not just ransomware, but breaches over the years and who's been breached. Credit card companies, um, reporting agents, credit reporting agencies who seem to be in business the next year. I don't know how that goes. But so yeah, it's a lot of work. But 40% of all cyber attacks are ransomware. So this is ground zero. And the fact that people are starting to employ preventative measures, that making sure that they have clean backups, making sure that they can do clean restores and verify it after the fact, tells us that there's a whole lot more going on in the world of upfront monitoring, upfront detection, and prevention over the ugly thing, which is data recovery. You never want to have to pull that insurance policy if you don't need to, right?
Mm.
Beyond that, as we look into what are we seeing in terms of positive outcomes or positive strategies that people can employ? There's a shared trend toward greater adoption of an investment in SIM and SOAR solutions. 33% of VEEMS respondents said, "Hey, I can't do this the old-fashioned way," which was, you've got a SOC. You've seen these scenarios where you've got a bunch of monitors and a bunch of people, physically, manually monitoring these SOCs. Now, obviously, the ideal for some time has been to automate as much as possible. The collection and the analysis of the threat information. But now we're seeing more and more of that. We're seeing a focus on email security. I have a book here, Mark, that I want to make sure that I show you, because I know how you like to focus on the crime and punishment aspect of this. Can you read this?
100%. Let's get kinetic. I love it.
This is, I don't know if you can read this. Fancy Bear Goes Fishing: The Dark History of the Information Age in 5 Extraordinary Hacks. Now, this is not a book about ransomware per se. It's a book about the 5 greatest hacks in this law professor's mind, who happens to be a techie and a Yale law professor, Shapiro. And we'll talk more about this in the future. But what he does is he looks at a number of world famous hacks, and he draws a bunch of conclusions. And his first one is Robert Morris, who the guy who in 1988, as the son of the head of the NSA, was in the embarrassing position of taking his Harvard degree and writing a worm just for the heck of it and having it basically crash the internet. Now, the internet at the time was only 60,000 machines, and only 6,000 of them stopped working, and they had to be Unix machines. Point is that this goes back, to when you were just a tadpole, right? 1988. And the interesting thing, I think, is that this guy got a slap on the wrist, right? Being the son of the NSA, taking down the internet. It was the first time. It was on front page news in the New York Times, but nobody really understood what was going on. Whereas 10 years later, when we had the I Love You love bug, and we had NIMDA, which is admin spelled backwards, that guy got 20 months in prison. The guy who hacked, the unfortunate Massachusetts fellow who hacked into Paris Hilton's cell phone, got a couple of years in jail. Now, I know we've talked about, where are the consequences. These may be exceptions, but it's interesting to see that as we get into the 90s, and I haven't by any means done exhaustive research on this, right? But I've started. It's becoming obvious as people break into Paris Hilton's cell phone by breaking into Deutsche Telekom, which was her service, right? And while they're hacking her phone and making and embarrassing her, presumably by spreading the contents around the internet. More importantly, what they're doing is they're getting the the identity information off of, I think it's 8, 10, 14 million subscribers. And that's really why
Right.
he went to jail, right? So the crime and punishment part of this is going to be a constant theme, right? Because we're being asked by the government to do more and more in the area of being accountable and responsible for what happens with the software we build. Now, it's interesting that software builders really haven't been held to account. I mean, all kinds of bad stuff happened back in the early days of Microsoft, right? And, I mean, the love bug thing, the NIMD thing. But the fact is that those corporations have been largely protected. And a lot of it came out through the Patriot Act, where they were trying not to, they didn't want to be in the business of holding American corporations responsible for the bad things that maybe Al Qaeda might do with their software. But I think the pendulum is swinging the other way now, and people are saying, no, these guys have to be accountable. And the vendors I deal with take security very seriously. So how can we put a bow around this? People are understanding now that data is the answer, I think, which, that's like motherhood and apple pie, but 90% or more of respondents to these studies agree that they either have to or will have to, doesn't mean they are, better capture, better analysis of detection data is the best way you can guard against successful ransomware attacks. So they're turning to a greater emphasis on observability, monitoring, and of course automation, which are many of the things that the working groups at ONUG are focused on. A lot of this stuff is enabled by cloud services, so there's a greater focus in the industry on leveraging those cloud-based services. 50% of the respondents say that this is where the majority of their time goes now, into cloud-specific security services configuration, whether it's compute, whether it's storage, networking, identity management, authentication and authorization. And 40% plus are saying that, somewhere in the 40s are saying that they need to upskill their staff on the cloud side of things, that that's where their biggest shortfall is. So I think that is where I'm going to leave my enumeration of numbers, lest I turn everybody's eyes to glass. But this talent story, of course, is a major one, and will be another. It's another one of the what I call the 6 themes that describe our current cyber estate. And so we've brushed the surface today on ransomware, and we will come back next time with a story about how 0-day is meshing with ransomware to create this environment where, you really do need more skills, more eyeballs, more automation. So that's it for me for today.
That's great. I'll offer one piece of collateral for because to your point, Michael, so many enterprise organizations have large organizations. They're very plugged into both their enterprise best practices and in many cases government recommendations. One of those is from CISA.gov, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
Yeah.
That's America's cyber defense agency. They have what's called the CISA Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, MSISAC, and they have produced a joint ransomware guide. I don't know if I should be concerned that the last revision of it was September of 2020, but
you should be concerned.
Whether it's
as an American,
far be it from me to throw shade at anything government. But nonetheless,
here's what we should do. We should read it and tell them what they need to do better.
Yeah, I will say this: there's a lot of great guidance in this ransomware guide. So if you are just getting your feet wet into this space and want to understand what you can do from a prevention and recovery and cultural point of view to deal with ransomware, this is a great place to start. Michael, thank you as always. It's a ton of information. We're going to continue this conversation, as you mentioned, with one of my favorite topics, the zero day topic. And it's really shout out to you and the Cloud Native Security team who did kind of a fusion mashup at ONUG Spring around Zero Trust Zero Day. So feel free to, our audience should go to onug.net and check out those sessions that are available. You can go look at the Spring Conference 2023 that was in Dallas, my hometown, and see a little bit about what Mike and the team are doing. You should absolutely consider this an invitation to get involved with ONUG. Join the ONUG working groups. You can go to onug.net to check that out. And on behalf of the ONUG community, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next ONUG podcast. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Mark.